And he then goes on to basically say, I have 2 slides, and he puts up a big slide that says, JBoss is free. And then the second slide was, and it doesn't suck. This guy's got like 2 really amazing characteristics of an entrepreneur. He's got charisma and he's got chutzpah. I've probably sold more free software in my life than anyone. You need to have extreme empathy for customers. You just need to own the fact that it's your fault. Even if it's not your fault, it's your fault. People will judge you based on what you have on the truck right now, but they're really buying in to your vision. You have to hire somebody who, even if they haven't been a builder before, right? They've got some of the kind of core DNA that shows that they could. I'm incredibly bullish that this is the next phase of computing, right? I look at what's happening in AI as foundational as the shift to mobile, right? A little over a decade ago. The products from the incumbents, I think the exact words used were, they're an afterthought. They're not purpose-built. You're going to see a tremendous renaissance, especially in the enterprise, of build versus buy. I always tell reps that work for me that, express that they want to go into leadership to make sure that their ego can handle making less money than your best rep.
Welcome to Brick by Brick, where we learn how successful startups were really built directly from the people who built them. My name is Arpan Punyani, co-founder of Garuda Ventures. Today, our guest is Ben Sabrin. Ben is a seasoned early sales leader at iconic enterprise infrastructure businesses such as JBoss, MongoDB, Rackspace, other startups, and now is head of global sales at Weaviate, the vector database company. In this episode, we cover a wide range of topics, including what founders should look for in early-stage GTM talent, whether AI use cases are starting to happen in production for enterprises, and some things that make infrastructure products unique. Enjoy. Hello, Ben.
Hi, Arpan.
How are you?
I'm fantastic.
Good. Thank you for doing this. So welcome to Brick by Brick, our podcast here at Garuda Ventures. Great to have you.
It's great to be here.
Good. I appreciate you doing this. So I thought we'd probably start with just obviously background on you and yourself, your history, and then we've got a lot to cover and want to get through a lot. So just love to maybe start out with a little background on yourself, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, fast forward version. Started my career as a recruiter. I'm a recruiter at heart. That's one of the things I love about building early stage companies is I love building teams and putting teams together. I got my start in software, helping define and build the open source business model at JBoss. I was the first employee there. We sold JBoss to Red Hat in 2006. Then tried to start my own company. It was way before its time. I was trying to build basically an AI recruiting engine in 2008. Little early, fast forward now, there's a couple of them. I still don't think any of them are super great, but that's a different story for a different day. Then I joined Mongo and was the original VP of sales at MongoDB, scaled them pretty aggressively over a period of time. Had a couple other stints in various areas. And then I met you after when we were building Scale FT, which you helped orchestrate get acquired by Okta. And then we worked together at Okta for 3.5 years. And now I'm back in, my happy place, which is building another open source software company. Somehow I tend to gravitate towards building and something I really love doing.
We're going to get into all that. Thank you for the overview. And we are going to tick the box on all those topics. I appreciate the high level, but of course, currently Chief Revenue Officer at Weaviate, vector database business, and a long history in tech. So thanks again, Ben, for doing this. Let's hop in. I think maybe an interesting place to start would be, you kind of addressed it just now, but as you probably know, what we're building with Brick by Brick, this podcast, is these stories of the early employees, the early builders of startups who maybe people don't always hear from. You were basically the first person who came to mind for something like this, so I appreciate you doing it. How did you kind of get into tech sales in the first place? It sounds like you were in recruiting actually initially. How did you go from that to actually carrying a bag and being a seller?
Great question. So Now I'm going to age myself a little bit. So it was the dot-com meltdown. It was the end of 2001, and I was recruiting. Which, when you're a technical recruiter and the market melts down, there's definitely challenges. I was still doing good because I was definitely very good at what I did. But I really wanted to sell software. I was like, I love what's going on. I had gotten very involved in the Java community in Atlanta. I became the vice president of the Java user group. And it was through that that I had met Mark Fleury, who was the founder of JBoss. Now, I had been applying for software sales jobs, and with the market where it was, they wanted somebody who had 10 years of experience, right? Well, obviously, I didn't have 10 years of experience because I didn't have 10 years of working experience. But I knew I could do it. So one night we had a vendor shootout for all of the app server vendors, and it was IBM, BEA, Oracle, Borland, Sybase, Macromedia, and this guy named Mark Fleury, who was the founder of JBoss, and he showed up, and we didn't even know he was coming. We didn't know he lived in Atlanta, and he gets up in front of the room, and there's about 300 people there that night. Everybody had 15 minutes or really 10 minutes to say what made their product unique, because these were all products built on top of a standard. So it was the Java 2 Enterprise Edition standard. So it was what made your product unique and what it cost. And he then goes on to basically say, I have 2 slides, and in the spirit of open source, I borrowed this guy's laptop, and he puts up a big slide. The first one, it's a big, bold, black type. It says, JBoss is free, right? And this is after everybody was like, oh, 10,000 per CPU, 25,000 per CPU, right? And the room goes wild. And then the second slide was, and it doesn't suck, right? Also in big, bold, black type. And then he eloquently went on to describe why it didn't suck. And, I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, oh man, this guy's got like 2, really amazing characteristics of an entrepreneur. He's got charisma, and he's got I'll use a Yiddish word. He's got chutzpah, right? And several of us wind up going out for appetizers and drinks after. And he's like, "Hey, I really want to grow my company, but I don't want to raise money." And I'm like, "Oh, I can help." And he's like, "Yeah, whatever, kid." Right? Like, kind of just brushing me off, because at the time I was 26, and I'm like, "No, seriously." And I was thinking at the time, I was thinking with my recruiting hat on, like, "Oh, you want to grow this company? You don't want to raise money, so we can get a project, put a consultant on it, and you keep growing. You don't take in any overhead, you just make money." And so I sent him a follow-up email. He ignored me. Sent him another one. He ignored me. And then the third time, he finally got back to me. And he said, "Come meet me at my office." Cool. The directions, this is still when MapQuest was how you got places that you didn't know where you were going. And I showed up at what I thought was his office. It was his house. And this was before working from home was like a thing. And next thing I know, I was having lunch with him and his wife, who I didn't realize was part of the business. And he looked across the table at me, and he's like, "How would you grow my business?" Like, not even like, "Who are you? Good to meet you." And at that lunch, I just kind of laid out the original business model for JBoss, and that got me into selling software.
Super interesting. So great story, and I mean, a lot of scrappiness involved in that initial narrative. I mean, so you basically were just an early employee who wanted to help grow JBoss, and it turned out that meant trying to sell the product. How did you sell something that he told everyone was free? I mean, this is going to get into some stuff we'll talk about, but
Well, I've been
what does it mean to sell something?
Time. I've probably sold more free software in my life than anyone. And so how do you do that, right? Well, I think when you have a product that has a process ID that's running on a server that's serving production workloads, most companies, especially in today's day and age with compliance and SOC 2 and ISO 27001, there's some mandates in there to say you need certain SLAs from your production software vendors, right, in order to be compliant. And so when you are a process ID, people know you're running in. Even if developers just go download open source and start using it, the people that are running prod are like, hey, what is this thing? I want support, right? I need support. And the early days, the vast majority of the business model of open source was around support, training, and consulting. That was kind of the triumvirate. Now, and now, mind you, this is also at a time when it wasn't sexy for VCs to fund open source companies, right? We were one of the, us, JBoss and MySQL were two of the first to really raise money and have meaningful exits. Now it's like, if you're an infrastructure, it's almost expected, right, that you have an open source, strategy at least. And so that's how we did it. And then eventually you have to build some, maybe some additional features. At JBoss, we focused on the management layer. So how do we make operationalizing JBoss easier and better? We did the same thing in the early days at Mongo, and obviously MongoDB Atlas is, a runaway success. Now, the de facto motion for most open source companies is, the first thing they start to do once their project gets some kind of critical mass is to build a cloud service.
Right. And so you kind of just talked about Mongo, which is the next thing I want to talk about. Again, sort of foundational open source and infra companies that you were early to and that were early in your career. So maybe just briefly on either or both of these companies that I think old hands in software will know, and maybe newer entrepreneurs may know less. Of course, folks certainly know MongoDB now. But in any case, kind of like any particular stories. Of course, there are infinite, but maybe one or two that stand out as kind of inflection points or interesting things that you lived through, whether you were part of or that you kind of saw happen firsthand at these super early businesses that may be instructive to founders in some way.
Yeah,
or to early employees, I should say.
Well, I think there's a couple things, and I share this message with a bunch of our folks internally, which is when you're an infrastructure company and a platform that other people build their business on top of, that comes with, I don't care what you do in the company, right? That comes with a set of responsibilities, because if somehow your product isn't working, that means their business isn't working, right? And so, you need to have extreme empathy for customers, right? When they're calling because something's really broken, and it's, let's get them fixed, and let's get this fixed as soon as possible, even if it's not our fault, right? They still called us, right? Even if they did something that they shouldn't have, it doesn't matter, especially when you're a database company. Right? When you're a database company, you just need to own the fact that, like, it's your fault. Even if it's not your fault, it's your fault, right? And so get in the boat with your customers and really help figure it out. And that, like I said, that doesn't just mean engineering. That doesn't just mean the support team. That means your sales team, whoever, has that customer relationship. One day, in the early days of Mongo, I remember Elliot, our CTO, and Max, the president at the time, spending the night, at a customer of ours because they were down, right? We were powering the initial launch of iHeartRadio. So they were having this big launch concert in Vegas, and the entire song catalog was built on Mongo back then. And so they're like, hey, things are working fine, but can you come and just sit with us in our war room during the concert just to make sure? And our VP of engineering went and camped out with them in New York, right? And I think it's things like that that give you that endearing relationship with customers. And if you're in the infra business, you gotta be there.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, like a couple of comments that it brings to mind. One is, as investors, we look for this in founders is extreme customer empathy. You genuinely have to care about what your customers. You shouldn't be doing a company, particularly in enterprise software, if you don't actually genuinely feel like you have a stake in your customers being successful in what they're doing.
Yeah.
It also reminds me, because we, as you kind of alluded to, we had acquired your last one of your companies into Okta, ScaleFT, and I don't know if this was before or after your time there, but MLB.com Okta had a similar engagement with them that you're describing with iHeartRadio, where go into the field, go to the customer, and make sure opening day in that case was a huge success for MLB.com. So it goes to show what you have to do if you're anything infra like.
Yeah, and Neil Boland, who's the CISO at MLB, is a huge proponent of Okta as a result.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, no, and that's kind of the last lesson I think on that thread, and then we'll keep going, which is, when we talk to companies as well, and as you know, at the early days, it's customers are betting on you, how much you care about the problem and how much you care about them, not so much that you have the right features. I think that comes later. But in the early days, it's like we're betting on you, and we trust that you're going to figure it out.
Well, and I think the other thing, that I would pass on, and I even have this conversation openly with prospective customers, like, especially when you're paving new ground. So Weaviate is one of the, leaders in a very early new infrastructure category known as vector databases. Mm-hmm. And like very few people understand how to operate a vector database at scale, right? And what that means is there's going to be times where we're going to hit some edges, right? And what I like to tell my team and prospective customers, it's like, look, it's not if we're going to find a bug, right? It's when, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not about the fact that it exists. It's about how we respond, right? And you'll judge us based on how we respond when something goes wrong. And then you'll also judge us, and I think this is also really important for any infrastructure company. Like, if you're an enterprise and you start to work with a smaller company like a Weaviate, or in my previous lives, it's people will judge you based on what you have on the truck right now, but they're really buying in to your vision for where you're taking it, right? Yep. And you have to be really clear and not afraid to share your roadmap, right? Mm-hmm. And they will judge you on how you execute against that, right? And provided you continue to deliver and you continue to innovate, and yes, there's going to be times where things are going to slip by, a couple weeks, a month, and that's okay, right? But it's about being able to consistently deliver what you say you're going to deliver is really important.
Yeah, no, for sure. Makes sense. Why don't we talk for a little bit, Ben? I want to talk a little bit about kind of early days of startups, talent, early hiring, the very early stages that you are uniquely suited to talk about. So I guess maybe just start with like kind of why for you personally, and then we'll talk about sort of like advice and such. Why is this the stage that you like to be at? You're quite seasoned and successful. Like, why do you keep doing your very early stage thing?
It's funny. My partner and wife, Madeline, asked me the same question all the
time. Why? She means why in a different way. Why?
Yes, why? She means why in a very different way.
Sure.
I think there's several things. I think number one, in my fabric, in terms of like my being, I'm an activator. I am competitive. I'm strategic. And when you kind of factor in a bunch of those things together, it's very well built to drive innovation, right? And I think that when you like to activate and you like to move fast, sometimes it's hard to do in bigger companies, right? I mean, you obviously saw, you had a front row seat to me in an environment like that where, it wasn't always the easiest because there was a speed that I want to operate at, right? That sometimes it's not even that people don't want to, it's just there's things that because of the size and the complexity of the business, they just can't move that fast. And it's not like they're trying to move slowly on purpose, right? But you got to get a bunch of extra people to check different boxes when you're doing different things. And I think earlier you you can run a lot faster. You can run a lot of experiments. You can, not be afraid to fail and learn from those failures and do a bunch of things. And then I also I guess, like I've never written code in my life, but I'm perpetually curious. And like, I just love innovation. And if you love innovation, and especially like, I love when I can help bring innovation to a brand that my family interacts with, right? Where none of them ever understand what I do, right? Because, I'm always at the infrastructure layer and our products by themselves do nothing, right? But when I could say, hey, um, did you just go, buy a ticket on, Ticketmaster? Well, they were a customer of ours at Mongo back in the day, right? Or, did you do this with Disney? Well, they were, did you go play games in their, Disney entertainment website? Well, that was a lot of MongoDB, right? And so I think it's those things that like really get me excited, and obviously what gravitated me now towards like Weaviate. I mean, what's happening in the world of AI is fascinating.
Yep.
Right. And
no, I want to get to AI. I don't want to preempt you, but I want to talk a little bit about, like, because you've seen some big wins. You've been in the business for a long time. You've seen big wins. You've seen okay wins. I'm kind of curious. Do you see any correlation? It's a really broad question between, like, is it luck and timing? Is it product execution or sales execution? Is it some mix that some startups work and some don't? I mean, what's your experience been?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think there's definitely timing is always important, right? I think, being timing products. I mean, I think a great example. I mean, Scale FT, we were probably a tad early with the vision of BeyondCorp, right? And a lot of investors weren't ready to make big bets in that space at that time when we were trying to go after that market. And we still, the outcome was good. It wasn't amazing, but it was good, right? I think, but I think more importantly, people and team. I mean, you have to assemble a team of people that have grit and hustle, and don't really understand the words "it's not my job," right? That have each other's back. And so there's a lot of intangibles there that I think are really important. And I think the other thing too is, specifically if you're trying to do something in open source, you better be targeting a massive market, right? Because if you're not targeting a massive market, you're never going to build a big company, because you're never going to monetize 100% of your market, because there's going to be people that self-select and use your open source product, and you have to know that that's okay, right? And that also puts some burden on you as a company to like figure out other ways to innovate, right? Whether it's your cloud service or different things like that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, maybe one way to say it is you've got to necessary but not sufficient condition to have this amazing team, but sometimes it's timing. MongoDB gets huge, ScaleFT doesn't. It's just sometimes the way the
it is definitely time. Well, it's also like, I mean, I think it's jumping into certain waves, right, of computing. When Mongo was becoming a thing, it was when mobile was exploding, right? And there was this whole new set of applications that people wanted to build that were based upon systems of interaction versus your traditional systems of record, right? And as people started to build those things, developers started to build those things on the traditional databases, there was an impedance mismatch, right? So they were constantly context switching from how they wrote code to how they needed to interact with the database. And because the rigidity, for good reason, of the relational database, right? People couldn't run as fast as they wanted to run, in a lot of ways, because they didn't fully know exactly what they wanted to build. They were iterating quickly, they were running quickly, and so a new database and a new data type emerged.
Yeah, I've seen this described elsewhere, as like the innovations at the application layer force innovation at the infrastructure layer, because people want to build things and the infra layer isn't keeping up, and so innovation is sort of demanded at the infra layer, like what you're describing here with Mongo.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So
and the catalyst for that, right, is a platform shift, right? And so like if we look at like first there was a platform shift into mobile, right? So it was driven by hardware initially from a device perspective. And then it takes time for all the software to follow, right? And if you think about like where we are now, right, it's kind of driven by like the GPU, right? Now we finally have the hardware that can support the AI research that's been going on for the last 20 years, right? And as a result, there's a whole new stack that's starting to emerge, right,
Yep.
to support that new reality.
So makes sense. I think switching to the founder lens for a minute, like as folks are at the earliest stages are evolving past founder led everything to we need to hire, obviously, you know, excluding engineering, but we need to hire sales and marketing, however you define that, AE, SDR, demand gen. What are they looking for? What should they be looking for? I mean, you know, what's the right profile, largely speaking, no matter what specific role you have in the demand in the GTM function? What's the right kind of rough outlines of a profile that this person will be a fit for what we need today versus they're not a fit right now?
Sure. I mean, if it's at the stage where the founders are basically turning over, at least beginning to turn over those go-to-market functions to others because they've been carrying that torch for a little bit, right? And they've established some evidence that it could work, right? And now they're like, okay, we've got that evidence, and we want some people that this is their full-time job versus other parts of the business. I think first and foremost, you have to hire somebody who even if they haven't been a builder before, right? They've got some of the kind of core DNA that shows that they could, right? Some is it like they're incredibly curious, right? If they're a seller, I mean, a lot of it depends upon what your product does, right? If you're a super technical product selling to a technical buyer, right, you need a seller who is insanely curious, that's not afraid of the technology, that's going to lean in and at night go watch some videos and listen to podcasts that help them understand, at least not at the like syntax level, right, but at least at the architectural level about what's happening, right, so they can have an intelligent conversation. I think that's super important. They they have to be somebody who isn't just programmed to a playbook. Like if all they've ever done has been a cog in a wheel and the playbook's been created for them and they've never been, you know, involved in helping create one,
creating the playbooks, right? Rather than
they're gonna struggle mightily. And there's probably,
and it's a great role for that person at 5 million ARR and beyond, not where you're talking about right now.
Correct. Right. And so like finding somebody, even if they've never built a playbook, they understand, right, that their job is to help build it, right? They're, on a daily basis, yes, they're selling, right, or they're marketing,
right.
But the other part, right, is they're solving for how do we get to repeatability, right? What are the things that we need to do to start to make this more and more repeatable? And they're documenting all of that along the way, so they can start to then to scale that thing, right? So they got to be able to almost operate blindfolded in a lot of ways. They can't need a lot of hand holding. They can't be somebody who needs like constant mentoring and constant, constant management, because most founders, especially technical founders, they're not necessarily, a lot of them are first-time founders, first-time CEOs, right? They're not necessarily seasoned leaders and managers in some cases, right? So like you got to get people that are super self-sufficient and can motivate themselves.
And I think an interesting nuance to this is, I think they can come in a couple of flavors. Either you've done it over and over, you're Ben Sabrin, and you just like this, and so the challenge for the founders is finding the people who've done it before and like to be very early. Or you have this amazing profile of person who has some kind of magic about them that they themselves don't even know because they've never done anything like this before. But that if you point them in a certain direction, they're going to make the playbooks their own. So it's kind of like green or like super seasoned, but knows this stage and wants this stage.
Yeah. And then on the super seasoned front, there's definitely plenty of people that say they want this stage, but are unwilling to put the work in, right? And I think the biggest red flag is, if you hire somebody who's got a decent amount of experience, and the first thing they want to do, the only thing they want to do in their first 90 days is hire other people. So like great example, I've been at Weaviate now almost 90 days. I haven't hired a single person. I am working several deals myself just because I need to really understand the process. I'm helping drive my team, coach my team on the deals they're working. I'm out there meeting with customers, and like it's all about uncovering what we've done so far, what elements are repeatable, what aren't, right? Before we start to just put a bunch of people on, we got to go prove it.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I want to ask about product market fit. We talk about this. We like to talk about this question in this podcast a lot, and particularly in your case because you've seen it work and not. I mean, I guess it's an intangible. Different people have different definitions. How did it feel when you had it? Let's just pick a company, MongoDB. I would say you can tell me. And then how does it feel conversely, kind of when you know you don't have it or you think you might have it but you really don't? I mean, how do you intangibly, qualitatively describe the feeling of we have product market fit, we can't ship fast enough, the customers are pulling it out of us, versus we're still we don't actually have it yet?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I think product market fit can differ based on the space and you operate. And what do I mean there, right? So like when you're infrastructure, right, product market fit is not necessarily about your product, is more about like, does the category exist, right? And if the category exists and the market is saying that the category exists, and you have a very good viable solution that can go win that category, right? Where you may still have some rough edges around your offering. So you may not truly have product market fit in a pricing and packaging and repeatability, right? But it's clear that this market is a market, right? You still need to kind of accelerate as if you have product market fit. And sometimes it's very hard for some people to get their head around, right? Now, if you're selling like a SaaS product that solves a problem, right? Your product market fit question is much more detailed, right? Are people willing to exchange money for this problem this product that solves this problem? Because a lot of infrastructure pieces, there isn't just one thing the product solves, right? It's an enabler. Like, right now we talk about.
It does some security, it does some networking, it does some.
Correct. Right. It's a database, right? Well, does the market need another database? Well, there's 40 people that are trying to compete for this market. I'd say the market probably needs this database, right? Obviously, a bunch of them aren't going to win. Somebody's going to win. And in a category, in a situation like that, you got to try to run fast, right? To go win.
Right. Interesting framing. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing we think about a lot too, which is, do you want to be N of one, and whether it's SaaS or infrastructure, and I appreciate the distinction you're making, but whether applications or infra, like, do you want to be the only vendor provider standing, even if you're early, and then you wait, the market catches up to you and you're going to win it? Or do you want to know you're in a market that exists, but there's 15 competitors, just walk the floor at RSA and you'll see, now you're in a knife fight. Both have pros and cons, I think.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been, I think my last company, ngrok's a great product, loved by developers, super useful, but like in a market that in a lot of ways isn't necessarily a full-fledged market, right? And now they're doing well, right? But it's like, it's not necessarily a full-fledged standalone. The reverse proxy is not a full-fledged category. It's a piece of a bunch of things, and they're building other things on top of it, right?
Yeah, no, that's the hard thing. I think is like we talk to founders a lot about this, which is like, I think some founders don't appreciate that timing point enough and think if I build something really great, people will want it, or really, what do I mean? More that like. That the tailwinds of a market will push you forward more than you realize if you get the timing right.
Yeah.
So that goes back to
you make a great point on timing, right? Like, especially for some product-led growth products, maybe they get a tremendous amount of adoption early, right? And they don't kind of step on the gas. They continue to wait, and because they wait, right, their opportunity somewhat wanes. Because now there's others, or there's people solving things a different way, right? And you've basically just invited competitors into your market because you didn't go seize the position that you had.
Yeah.
right?
No, for sure. Technology markets are pretty efficient, and like I think we talk about this a lot, which is you got to be aggressive. It's very hard to win in a market and not be aggressive,
Yeah,
on some level.
yeah, you got to get out there and play to win. Because
Yeah,
most categories, uh, I don't say they're winner take all. I like to define it as winner take most.
I was about to say that.
That,
Yeah, winner
yeah,
take most for sure.
it's
Yeah,
and that's what you got to be playing for.
yeah. So you said a magic word that it's a great segue, which is PLG, product led growth. You've been in infrastructure and open source for a long time. How do you define product led growth? And I guess a really important corollary is how does a company that for which PLG is relevant marry product led growth and top down sales led growth?
Yeah, it's I think it's a problem I've been thinking about for a long time because in my mind, um, open source is the original PLG, right? Before SaaS was SaaS, open source software people were downloading, using, and then eventually entering into, a commercial relationship. And I always say, and this is very true probably with a lot of PLG where there's a free tier or a very cheap tier that eventually grows, is the biggest innovation, I think, in either open source or PLG is you're shrinking the prove it phase of the sales cycle, right? You're letting people go figure out on their own, right, that your product can solve the problems that they're trying to solve, right? Now, I think that not every PLG product is meant to also be complemented with a top-down motion. I think there's certain products, maybe they're solving a niche problem, right? Or they're solving a problem that is just allowing developers to do the things that they want to do, and they just want to keep it under the radar, and an executive never really cares about it. Going and building a top-down motion to try to go, capitalize on the logos of the individual users may not be successful, right? Especially if it's not a full-fledged platform. That said, like if you're a critical infrastructure component, database, middleware, security product, and you are what you enable is strategic, you absolutely should be taking the signal that you're getting from that bottoms up, user signal, right? And you should be attacking those accounts where you're getting that signal top down, right? Like if I use where we're at right now at Weaviate, AI, so it's very rare that you get to sell an infrastructure component that's a topic in the boardroom. The vector database isn't a topic in the boardroom, right? But the AI strategy is, right? And I believe that the vector database is one of four pillars of a good AI strategy. There's the foundational models, there's the vector database, there's the ETL layer. So how do I get data in and out? And then there's the frameworks, right? Those are like kind of the four key building blocks for how you build an AI native strategy. And so it would be silly of us to not go attack top down in places where we know there's signal, right? And that's
yeah. And your analogy, it makes me think of like, one way to think about, to your point, developer products or PLG first products, that maybe the way to think about it is if they're not horizontal across the org, but for example, let's say single player mode just for a developer, like coding, autopilot or copilot, etc. Great bottom up only theoretically, but if it needs to touch the whole org, like a vector database or identity management or something, you need to kind of eventually go in top down.
Yeah, because eventually there's going to be a conversation where like you're going to have to talk to an enterprise architecture body. You have to become a standard. You have to get approved. They got to vet you. And like I think a great example would be like in Calendly. Calendly is a great PLG company. Like, is a CIO going to buy Calendly? Like maybe, but like probably not, right? Maybe a RevOps leader, right? Who's focused in that area. But like most of it, it's just like, all right, there's a bunch of people using it now. Maybe we'll bubble it up to a bigger account.
And to wrap this one, I mean, to use another Okta / Auth0 analogy, of course, my team and we had acquired Auth0. after seeing them in the field for a long time, I think, it's an example of your infra layer company, on my point, company wide thing where like developers loved it. They had a great business, but eventually they were getting to the CTO before Okta was. And that's because it became sort of a business wide initiative to be the auth layer for external websites. So you talked about Weaviate. Let's go there. This business you've joined recently, and use it as an entry to talk about AI, of course, which is the topic du jour for everyone in software. So let's talk about Weaviate, and then I want to wrap with lessons learned, advice of your many years as a leader. So in Weaviate, you've joined recently as Chief Revenue Officer. I guess you said you've been there about 90 days. So just restate for us, what is it? What is a vector database? And then I think maybe to start with the first substantive question, I guess, is like, why do I really need a vector database? Taking the other side of it, isn't it, quote, just an add-on to another database?
Yeah, it's a great question.
I'm making you stand up and do QBRs.
It's all good. I mean, it's a question that I asked myself, and I asked a lot of smart people that are smarter than me during my due diligence process, right? So, what is a vector database, right? So, a vector database, the whole category initially started to build semantic search, right? And that's because a lot of keyword search is limiting, right? Your results are only as good as the search string that went into the engine to go get exactly what you searched for. And the engines weren't smart enough to go find things that looked like, right, what you just typed, right? And so vector search started to emerge as like, okay, how do we basically do things that are more similar? So we can basically take an object, we can give that object a certain number of dimensions, and now we can bring things based on the distance between objects. We can display results in a way that we get close, or we can match the exact meaning, but we can also get close, right? Initially targeted to things like e-commerce, fraud detection, recommendation systems. And what's interesting is a lot of people have been solving that with ML, just like building machine learning models, taking those machine learning models, putting them into production. What the vector database has done is it's taken that machine learning, those models, and brought them into the actual database itself, right? So now the database is really smart and intelligent and can do a lot of the serving the results that those algorithms would have served on their own. So that's basically what it does. And candidly, I'm 75 days in. My definition may not be the textbook definition. But what changed with vector databases and why you see the category kind of really accelerating, and you have every database company and their mother basically saying, oh yeah, we have vector search too, right? Because it's just an index. Is when the large language models hit the market in 2022, the output of a large language model is a vector embedding, right? And so it became very natural to take that vector embedding, especially if you wanted to start preventing hallucinations from the large language model, to take the results and store those embeddings in the database. And now when you go back to the large language model to ask it a question, it already has some knowledge, right, based on those embeddings, right? So it's going and finding information that's much more closely related to what it already knows, right? And so that's where people started building, retrieval augmented generation applications, and you basically, those embeddings are very well stored in a vector database.
So the LLMs were clearly the catalyst for the vector database category to take off. And I think it's a good segue to, what are you seeing in the field already? I guess 75 days in, and we're all talking to customers about what they're doing in AI. I guess, like, how sustainable is this? We look at, for example, NVIDIA's earnings and other sort of even lower down the stack as a read through or insights into how sustainable is AI. What's your view on, is this a phase shift? Is this something sustainable? Are the budgets kind of more of the experimental budgets, or are they moving into production use cases at the largest enterprise?
Yeah, there's definitely stuff that's moving into production in 2024, for sure. I think 2023, early 2024 was very much about experimentation. People are absolutely moving into production now. I've got a bunch of customers that I can't talk about that are doing some really, really killer things.
Yeah. Do they tend to be on the internal use cases, employee facing, or external? Or
I would say initially, right? So a lot of, especially large enterprises, the place they start is on internal. How do I take, you know, the large collection of information that we use as like policies and procedures and all sorts of different things, like knowledge about how we operate, and how do I make it easier for my people to find, right? And that's also why we tend to see a lot of companies prefer our deployment model, which is they can run it in their VPC or our public cloud, because a lot of these people want to run it in their own cloud or in their own data centers, even because it's super confidential information, right? But we are starting to see a bunch of stuff customer facing. The customer facing stuff, I think, is more newer companies. I mean, obviously, there's a ton of customer facing chatbots that are still, probably in the first inning in terms of their quality, right? I tend to be, obviously, I joined a company that's an infrastructure component. I'm incredibly bullish that this is the next phase of computing, right? I look at what's happening in AI as foundational as the shift to mobile, right? A little over a decade ago, right? And I actually think when it's all said and done, it is going to be the most significant movement since the graphical user interface, right? And everything that happened, right, in that world of like client server and then distributed systems. And the reason I say that is what I don't think enough people talk about is the biggest innovation that the large language models enable is the interface to computing is completely changing, right? So gone are the days when I build an application that is doing some basic CRUD application, CRUD things, going to a database, displaying that result to a user, letting that user then click around on that interface, send the results back to the database, and rinse, wash, and repeat, right? I have all my data. Why do I need to push that up through an interface? Why can't I just allow somebody to say, I'm a seller. Why do I'm a sales leader, right? Why do I have to go log into my HubSpot dashboard and go, click around and look at things versus saying, hey, what are the 5 deals that are supposed to close next week, right? Which reps are hitting their activity and pipe gen targets? Which reps aren't? Yeah. How many people are below 75% of their target for what we want out of them in this period of time, right? Now it can show me those things visually, right? Or it can just tell it to me, right? Or it can just pop a message in Slack, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And so, and I think that's like, and that goes back to why I believe the vector database is a standalone category, because I think it's part of this new infrastructure stack that will enable this new future where we are building applications where the interface is your voice, your text, a string of text, a series of events that an agent orchestrates, an image, right? There's no reason why I shouldn't be able to take a video of something I'm trying to, because I'm not handy at all, take a video of something I'm trying to fix at my house, right? Pop it into the search engine for Lowe's or Home Depot and instantly have the things that I need put in a shopping cart for me to go pick it up, right? And that's what's kind of starting, like, that's the art of the possible, right? And so that's why I don't think it's just an index, right? Most of the incumbents, they talk about vector databases as vector search. They talk about it's just an index type. I was in New York this week, had some interesting meetings. One of the meetings with a very forward-thinking institution, and they have relationships with all of the incumbents. They pay a lot of the big data companies and database companies plenty of money, and they want to do a bunch of stuff with us because the products from the incumbents, I think the exact words used were, they're an afterthought, right? They're not purpose built, and they're great for proof of concepts and prototypes and to start kind of crawling. But if you really want to do something at scale, you need something purpose built. And the same thing happened a decade ago with MongoDB, right? When all of NoSQL came out and the document database came out, people were like, it's just a key value store. It's not interesting. It's just JSON. You can do JSON and Postgres, right? Most people thought once you could do JSON and Postgres, MongoDB would die. We all know that's not true. And why did the category emerge and continue and actually support multiple public companies, right? Because Mongo's public, Couchbase is public. Redis is a decent sized company. There's been other acquisitions in the space. It was because people were building different applications, right? What we were building facilitated a new underlying infrastructure stack, right? You had all the JavaScript frameworks and you had the NoSQL databases that were speaking JSON. JSON became the payload that everybody was using. We're building different applications. Like, go back to what I said, which is the interface to computing is changing. Well, so then why am I going to use a backend database who was a system of record when the system of record in today's day and age is probably going to be my data warehouse, right? If I was to make a prediction of the future, and for all my friends that maybe listen to this that work in hedge funds, I would start probably some fairly long-term short positions on a lot of SaaS companies, because there's been a lot of movement over the last 5+ years to like reverse ETL a lot of your data out of all the SaaS platforms, so you have all that data anyway. Well, why am I going to pay somebody per seat to show me information about my data when I could just ask questions? Or I can orchestrate an agent to go take action across a series of components of my data and not pay you. And I think you're going to see a tremendous renaissance, especially in the enterprise, of build versus buy, right? Enterprises, because the cost of building net new AI native applications is going to continue to go down. And the value is going to be so dramatic that you're gonna say, well, yeah, I can go build that. It's not going to take a long time.
Super interesting on all those. A couple of reactions I'd say. One is, you talked a lot about the infra layer. I think at the application layer, our perspective is, I think the bull case of startups at the application layer, Enterprise 3.0, is what you described. It's a new computing interface. The incumbents at SaaS are subject to the innovator's dilemma. So we think maybe new applications, net new AI native, are going to do really well. And then there will be big winners at the infra layer, but not so many. I mean, there's going to be a couple in each category. But I think you're right. So it's an exciting time. It's super disruptive. I think we tend to take the same position that this is a dramatic change, and at least at Weaviate, you're at the front lines of it. So thank you. Let's wrap real quick. Maybe rapid fire style. I think, just given timing.
Sure.
In terms of career advice, we started with your early days. We talked about the journey you've been in, and now you're sitting in the leadership seat as you have a couple times now, and at this point in your career. So maybe putting your coach and advice hat on for a minute. So I guess from a seller's standpoint, let's talk about sales. I think I see individual contributor reps. They can stay individual contributors. They can choose to go into leadership. That's a similar decision point for engineers. How should early career salespeople think about that distinction, and how do they optimize their choices to be the best at one or the other?
Yeah, that's a good question. I always tell reps that work for me that, express that they want to go into leadership, to make sure that that their ego can handle, especially if they're really good, right? Which means, they're probably making a ton of money. Can your ego handle making less money than your best rep, right? If the answer to that is no, you should stay an individual contributor, because the only way you're going to make more money is if you have some sort of exit event, right? Because you're going to have more equity in the company as a leader versus an IC, right? Now, not everybody's wired that way. It's not always all about money. I've never met too many sellers that didn't fall into the category where money was one of the more important drivers. So that would be number one. I think number two is you have to be willing to manage folks that in some ways are never completely satisfied, and that's okay, right? And you don't want to suppress that behavior because that's the same behavior that you want to take externally, right? You want people to go out and want more from the market. They want to win more deals. They want to sign more deals, right? They want bigger deals, right? And so, how that's expressed internally is I want less quota. I want more accounts. I want a better territory, right? Kind of all those things. Um, and I think the other thing, I mean, one of the advices I would give people early in career, like if you want to go do a startup and take a risk, do it early in your career, right? I was fortunate that like the first time I jumped into the startup pool, right, we had an unbelievable run. Like we took JBoss from, in today's day and age, the numbers would have been stupid, but we took JBoss from 0 to 65 million in revenue in 4 years. We got acquired for $420 million. We'd only raised a Series A, right? We raised a 30 pre, 40 post. 2 years later, we got acquired, right? And so I was in a position that I can continue even once I have a family, right, to take risks because I had a successful run earlier in my career. And I think if you don't, it changes your ability to do that, right? So if you're going to do it early, is and do it where you know that there's a 90% chance you're going to fail, right? Because that's VCs are always betting on I need 1 out of 10 to return the fund, right? And that's how I'm indexed, right? So very few people are better than choosing how investors choose.
Makes a lot of sense. Maybe one or two more, and then we'll wrap. Ben, I guess to make it more tangible, you're a new CRO. We talked about this a little bit, but kind of what gets someone
So
hired?
actually, my title right now is technically head of global sales.
Head of global sales. Okay. What are you?
I lost my ego,
Okay.
years ago.
You're head of global sales. You've been in the seat for a while. You do decide to open Rex. How does someone in this case, let's say, what are you looking for? How does someone get the offer versus someone who does it? I mean, I guess like what are you looking for?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple. Either it's somebody I aggressively pursue because I know how capable they are as a person, right? And then I need to see them kind of lean in and really believe that this is a place where they can be very successful. They can have fun. They're not afraid of the technology, and they know kind of the stage we're at, right? I think that's super important. I think the other thing that I tend to respond very well to, and some of the best hires I've ever made, are the people that like cold reach out to me and are very direct in terms of, hey, look, I see what you're doing, I see what you've done. I kind of see what's happening in this market. I want to come work. I want to come build this thing with you, right? And Mike Hayes, who I hired as an IC at MongoDB, he was working at Oracle at the time, and he did that, and he was amazing. He then went on to a great run at Elastic as a leader, and he's currently the VP of Sales at ClickHouse. And then the flip side of that is I've had people reach out to me that know somebody who works already on the team and doesn't take the time to actually go through that person. What that shows me is there's a lot of lack of EQ. And, because the first thing I'm going to do is like, especially when you mention somebody who works for me's name and you don't talk to them first, right? First thing I'm going to do is go talk to that person and say, hey, what do you think of this person? Right. And then when the response comes back, like, surprised, not surprised they reached right out to you.
Yeah. And I think the last, I think maybe to put a bow on that, it's, the earliest stages or even when you're in hyper growth mode or pre product market fit, you're indexing as a leader in any function on EQ. It's not sort of coin operated. Like you're helping build a business. You're a participant in building.
I want people that are willing to put their hard hat on, right, and go to work, and there's nothing beneath them, you know, and if it's, you know, handing out T-shirts in a trade show booth,
right?
If it's greeting people at an event we're doing, it's, you know, it is what it is, right? I mean,
I love it. That's what we live for as early stage investors, and what you're looking for. I'll give you the final word. We are gonna drop here. So any advice you have, any topic you want to share your unvarnished thoughts on before we wrap? Thank you again, Ben, for being an awesome
No,
guest.
it's my pleasure. I mean, look, I'm going to start hiring a bunch of people. So if you're watching this and you have that grit, definitely be opinionated and reach out to me, or get yourself introduced to me through somebody who already works for us.
I don't know when this episode will drop, but hopefully you're still going to be hiring pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, if we continue to do what I'm starting to see, we're going to be, you know, hiring in perpetuity.
Love it.
And I think other than that,
yeah,
it's really exciting right now. We are in the early innings of a major platform shift, probably the most significant that any of us have seen.
Amazing.
Right?
Yeah, it's crazy because we're in the all of us venture investors, founders, and early employees and execs are in the optimism business, and so it kind of, people always say that, but it does feel like, and it's hard to know in the moment, but it does, I would agree, it feels different right now. And
it feels really different. Just like, I think one of the biggest things is just the overall pace, the speed at which the innovation is happening.
Yeah.
Is pretty eye-opening.
Yep. Well, I'm going to leave it there, Ben. Thank you so much. We got to know each other a few years ago, and we're going to be friends for a long time. And I appreciate all of your partnership with me and us as we build our firm. And
absolutely, yeah.
Congrats to you.
If you're trying to raise a seed round, talk to Arpan and Richie. They're great investors.
I appreciate that. You're the man, dude. Thanks, Ben, and we'll catch up soon. Take care.
Cheers. Thanks, Arpan.
Yep.